welcome to my 9th video where we're going to actually this time get the fireballs to have different effects. The last video we kind of got a little bit sidetracked on cleaning up some code with the player. My cat wants to say hi. He's wants some attention, so he's a little bit unhappy there. So this is, let's actually start by loading in a explosion effect that we're going to use for one of the AoE fireballs. So let's start with a import package, custom package. And so we want to bring in this Fire Explosion 1 Unity package. And when we click import, it's going to have a few things. It's going to load some materials, a prefab, and some textures all for that prefab. So we'll hit import, and now we have it. What it looks like is that. So that we're going to use that for my AoE effect on my fireball. Alright, so we've added that. What? What, kitty? He, I guess, does not like my fireball. Oh man. Alright, well, recording with animals. Hey man, you jumped on my lap, buddy. Alright. Now that I'm distracted by a cat, let's go to the player fireball code and begin setting this up. So we're going to have to kind of overhaul a lot of these settings because I do want to add some stuff for the different area effects, like I had just imported. Now, if your fireball isn't going to have an AoE effect, it's just not going to have anything for these. So we're going to have a public float AoE range, area of effect range. I'm going to default that to 0 because only one of my fireballs is going to hit a area of effect. An area effect damage of how much damage, and again I'm going to default that to 0 because I don't generally want these to have an area effect going on here. And a knockback, and that needs to be a float. Also 0 because I'm going to add that in to only the fireball that needs to have that. And lastly, one of the variable debug draw gizmos, because I do want to be able to draw the gizmos for showing some things like a projected knockback and a projected AoE range, just to help from a development standpoint. So let's save on that. Oh, we also will need our game object for the actual explosion. So if you have an AoE range of 0, then this can actually be undefined because it's not going to attempt to use it unless we have an AoE range. So we've got all these different stats for my fireballs, and let's begin to set some of these fireballs up, and then we're going to go add the code to make them have the different effects. So let's start with my fireball level 1. This one, I want this to be a faster moving fireball, so I'm going to bump its speed up to 10. It needs to be a level 1 fireball. Damage is 5, knockback is 3, so it's just kind of a fast-moving poke. Impact's left 1 because it's only going to hit one thing. Range can be 9, so it has a little bit of extra range. And the rest of these I don't really need to have checked because I'm not going to be doing AoE stuff. And then Fireball 2. This is the one that I want to explode into an actual area of effect explosion. So that does mean I want to drag my prefab's effects Fire Explosion 1 into this explosion prefab. The move speed of this thing, let's make it not as fast as the other one, so we'll go with 9. It is level 2 because it's a level 2 fireball. Damage, this is the direct hit damage. So I'm going to leave that at 5 so that you get a little bit of bonus damage for hitting things. You could set it to 0 so that if you do 0, it means it only gets damage from its area of effect. Knockback, well, the area of effect is going to do most of the knockback on this, so I'm going to keep that to be 0.5. Only 1 impact. A range, how far will this travel before disappearing? 8 is fine. An AoE range of 2. An AoE damage of 15, and an AoE knockback of, let's go with 4. So it kind of knocks things around. And we will turn on the draw debug gizmo so we can actually see this as we begin to work on it. And the fireball level 3. This one I'm going to have is being a little bit slower of a attack. So let's go with the move speed of 6. Level 3. The damage, I want it to be kind of high, so let's go with 45. The knockback will be 10. Impacts left. Let's go with 10 because I want this thing to pierce enemies, so it can hit multiple things. The range on this, I do want it to be a little bit shorter range than the other ones, so I'm going to drop it to 6. And it does not have an area effect. So it's an extremely high knockback that will pierce through enemies. And so those are my fireball settings. And let's actually go code the fireball to take advantage of the settings that we have just set up. So we don't need to change anything yet in terms of variables. The start is fine. Although I think I need to instantiate my already hit variable here. So we need to add already hits as a new list of game objects. And then let's move into, let's first set up some of the gizmo stuff. So we'll do that around, let's just do it towards the end. Private void on draw gizmos, if debug draw gizmos. Then we'll draw the area effect. Gizmos.color equals color.red. Gizmos.draw wire sphere at transform.position, comma, AoE range. So that way we can see the area effect range. And it could even be worthwhile that, if AoE range is greater than 0, we do this. So it only actually draws that if it has an area effect. And let's also give a visual of the knockback force. So we'll do a vector 2 called hit force. hands are on the keyboard correct. And we're going to do kind of like what we did for the movement. Transform.right, which is the forward vector. We use that for this movement here. It's just the direction the fireball is pointing in. Times knockback plus AoE knockback. So we kind of like account for all the strengths of the knockbacks. And we will do gizmos.color. We can make that yellow. And we will do a gizmos.draw ray. Starting at my transform.position, going in the length of my hit force. So that will give us a visual of the relative strength of the fireball. Maybe one more closing curly brace. So that will give us just some extra visual feedback to know what our things are doing. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to minimize this, so make sure you've copied down the onDraw gizmo. And I guess let's get to actually getting these. Let's set up the effects for if it hits enemies, and that's going to be inside of the onTriggerEnter. So this is where it's going to actually execute the code for different levels of fireballs. So if other.compare tag. Now we've already added the enemy tag, so it is a legitimate tag, and already hit dot contains other.gameObject. So if we hit an enemy and it is not already in my list, so let's add it to the list by saying already hit dot add other.gameObject. So we've tracked that we've already hit this enemy, and we're not going to allow it to be hit more than once. Impacts left minus minus. So we take away one of those impacts. Now the rest of this is not going to work yet because we haven't coded this, but I'm going to put it in here because in the video where we cover the damage scripts, I'm not going to have an opportunity to address this extra stuff. So you'll notice that this actually, we don't have an enemy script yet, and we're going to want to comment this out. But when we get to the point where we will be coding it, you'll want to uncomment that. So we'll create a vector too called hit force, kind of like what we did there. And each different level, the fireball is going to calculate a different type of hit force. And we'll create a variable called actual damage. And so if we wanted to tweak how much damage this is going to deal, we could do that inside of the part where we determine behaviors for different level fireballs. So we'll have different behaviors based on the level of the fireball. So a level 1 fireball is meant to be ultimately kind of low knockback. It knockback in the same direction of the fireball. So we'll just change the hit force calculation to be transform.right times the knockback amount times 10, which I use to kind of adjust for kind of like the monster mass. Now you could do other computations inside of here, and we will in level 2. This is a low initial knockback relative to location hit, and also spawn AoE effect. So we'll calculate hit force. Now this hit force calculation is going to be a different one. This one's calculating it relative to where the hit occurred. So other.transform.position minus my transform.position dot normalize to turn it into a unit vector times knockback times 10. So this is the code that you would use to do a knockback based on the relative. So if you hit a monster on the side, it pushes them kind of sideways. This level 1 knockback is going to do knockback based off of just it pushes them in the same direction the fireball's traveling. So they'll always go backwards. This one could knock them to the side. And we're going to run the command AoE explosion, which does not exist yet, but we're going to add it. That's going to be the code that actually spawns the explosion graphic and then also checks to see if it has to administer damage to enemies. And so this one has high knockback in the same direction of the fireball. And actually, we can really just use this same computation there. But also multi-hits. So with this, we will then apply the damage to the enemy. Now this is going to be commented out because we don't have the command script. So it'd be script.hit, and we're going to pass in actual damage, comma hit force. So we'll eventually get to the point where we're going to have to do this when we make enemies, and so we're going to return back to this to uncomment this whenever we do have an enemy ready. And then if impacts left is less than or equal to 0, then we're just going to call the impact method. So that's for the multi-piercing fireball, or like any fireball, if we decide to have a power-up that may increase the number of hits that it can do, once it's out of hits, it just needs to disappear. And so that impact starts that animation for just causing it to go away. Alright, so we've got that. We've just got to finish up this area of effect explosion, and then we'll pretty much have a functional fireball. And that'll be kind of cool. So right in front of impact, well, let's do it after. Impact is way cooler, more important. We'll do public void AoE explosion. And what this is going to do is we're going to say game object explosion equals instantiate my explosion prefab at my transform.position and using my rotation. So, or I'll just use the identity. So it will spawn the explosion, and then we will also delete it. We'll say destroy explosion, comma 1.5. So what it's going to do is it's going to send the message after 1.5 seconds to delete this thing that we just instantiated. So even if this script is no longer in existence, it will still run this destroy command. And I'm giving it 1.5 seconds. I know the effect, I think, takes a little bit under 1 second to play out. So, but it doesn't repeat, so it's not going to loop, so it's not a big deal. But it'll just clean it up so there's not a whole bunch of particle systems just chilling. And then the rest of this would be for and at that point, let's just save it and test it and see, because we should be able to see the explosion in action, and then we'll just go through and write this. So it doesn't do its AoE explosion, but let's see if it hits something. Nothing. I think that's because it only is going to spawn it on an enemy. But you can actually see that each attack is having different ranges. Like this thing makes it out to the rock. The small fireball makes it a little bit, whoops, past the rock. And the big one detonated way sooner. So the big AoE, the big multi-hit one only makes it to there. So we weren't getting the AoE explosion, and that's because the only way that it gets called is if it hits an enemy. So we need to actually have impacts call it as well. So impact so if AoE range is greater than, prevent rounding errors, and impacts left is greater than 0. So notice that when we're actually hitting doodads, we're not using the impacts, like this impacts left system. It just immediately ends it. And so that will have it call the AoE explosion. So going back to this, we should now have it when it just hits things. And if we turn on gizmos for game mode, that fireball, we had it showing the area of effect. And so we can actually kind of verify that the explosion, I stopped it a little bit early, but the explosion is approximately the size of the area effect that it is going to enact upon. So that should be fine. The text file does talk about if you need to change the different settings, and all those different settings are inside of these different pieces. You're mostly just going to be changing the start size. So if you want to have a different area of effect, you can tweak those. So we've got a fireball that's doing its explosion. And the last thing I just want to kind of throw in there is the ability for it to deal damage, because I'm not going to have a chance to show that in the other video series. So let's do our AoE damage calculations right here. So let's get all the things within the area of effect range. So Collider 2D, I'm just going to call it thing list. Physics 2D, overlap circle, all. And we're going to get everything that is within transform.position and my area effect range. Oh, I need to make this an array. It's a Collider 2D array. And then we'll use a for each loop for each Collider 2D, temporarily called item in the list thing list. So everything that we're searching through, and we only want to apply this effect to enemies. So if item dot game object dot compare tag, if it's an enemy, then we're going to know that we can get the script. So enemy script equals item.getComponents enemy. And again, this isn't going to work, as you can see. That data type does not exist yet. So we'll comment that out. Vector 2 hit force. So we're going to calculate actually the same way we did up here. I'm just going to copy and paste that. This is from the level 2 version. This is the one I'm copying and pasting. And so vector 2 hit force, but instead of the thing in question here is called item. So normalize that. Instead of knockback, we want to use the AoE knockback variable. And then we will call script.hit, passing in AoE damage, comma, hit force. Again, that's commented out because we don't have a enemy script yet. And now I've added the comment. So this actually will go through and apply damage to each of the enemies. And you'll want to uncomment this on the video where we start setting up the ability to actually damage enemies. So we'll hit save. And then the fireball is pretty much done at this point. Scripts need to compile. Can hit play. And we've got a basic fireball. We've got the more stronger explosion one. Although it does look like that explosion does need to be on probably a higher layer, it looks like. So let's go change that, because this thing it's appearing behind the tree, and we definitely don't want that. So let's see, we've got over here in the renderer, oh, and it's appearing underneath, I guess, the top of the tree. Well, that is kind of odd for that. Just appears behind that tree kind of incorrectly. But according to its layer, it should be higher. I guess I'm probably not going to really worry too much about that, because it could be the other parts as well being beneath the layer. And so getting that to actually behave correctly might be a bit of a challenge, because like you could try to change all of these. And it is a little bit tricky to dynamically change the particle system's stacking order. So I'm just going to leave these for now. I might come back and take a look at changing how this thing would appear in the future, but for now I'm not going to really mess with it, and it's just going to have a few odd rendering things, because that is a lot of extra stuff to try to get the explosion to appear more correctly, because it doesn't really follow the same rules as sprites do, because there is no sprite renderer for this. I guess, yeah, there's really not much we can do about that. If we bring it up to Z1. Well, like I said, I'll explore that in a future video, because it's not a pleasant task to get that. There's no easy way to have a particle system controlling its layer height. So we'll just kind of leave that as that. And the next video, we'll talk about actually getting some kind of visual appearing above the head of the player to indicate the current charge level of the fireball. And so that's where we will leave this video.